All right, so go ahead and type in your My Scripts nano, and we're going to just call this the same thing as what we called it in the other one. We can just call it, script 1. So basic script, whatever you want to call it, and ensure that you have the appropriate extension on it. So what you're going to notice is it's going to come up, there's nothing in there, right? Because you're just creating this file. And what we're going to do is at the beginning of every single so the idea here is I'm going to show you the hard way, and then I'll show you the easy way. And then once we're done with the first script, we're going to transition over to it. So there's a couple of different reasons why it's the harder way. The reason is when you go ahead and you go through all of this, you have to kind of type in there, update it, run it. With something like Sublime, you can run it right from the IDE itself. Okay, so if you guys are familiar with Eclipse or any of the other IDEs, or the Windows version for idle for Python, you can pull those down if you want, but once again, it's an environment where you type everything in and it runs everything right there, so you don't have to wait. At the very beginning, we always have to define which interpreter we're using. Okay, so that was kind of the reason we went through the discussion earlier about 2.7, 3.0, 3.4, and so forth. If you give it this interpreter and you type in commands that are not resident to that interpreter, it's going to give you an error message. Okay, and what we're going to do here real quick is, just so that we have something inside of the script, we're going to import two values. One's importing the OS module, one's importing the sys module, and we'll talk about those in a bit and how we can use them. And so inside of Nano, you press Control-O and then press Enter to save it. And then Control-X to get out of it. All right. So if you take a look back at the slide, one of the things that you're going to notice is I said we have to modify permissions. So we've now saved the script. Now we actually have to go in and modify the permissions. So if we list everything out that's currently in there, you're going to notice here that we have a number of different letters that are assigned here on the left-hand side. So the very first one is identified for directories. So here, obviously, the upper directories are associated with that. But then each one of these associates itself with read, write, and execute. Okay? By default, you will always have a read, write, and then read whenever you create a new file. That's just the way it is. You can modify the kernel in order to make it different, but that's just how this particular distribution of Linux does it. Most, I believe, actually do the same thing. Okay? So if what we tried to do next is we tried to run the script itself, watch what winds up happening. So the first indication is if you try and tab over, it won't even let you tab over because it's not really something that the command line can use, okay, because it's not executable. All right, but if you go ahead and try and type the whole thing, it's going to tell you the permission is denied. Okay, so digging down a little bit, so each portion of these first three portions for each one are associated with the users, the groups, and then the rest of the world. Okay, so when you go in, if you've ever done a certification on an organization to figure out what they're doing, a lot of times, if you have Linux systems, some of your checks are going to be focused on making sure that you don't have what's called world writable, right? And so world writable would be where you have both read, write, and execute. And you should never have that because then it just gives anybody the ability to make changes to it. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a command within Linux itself that makes a modification to the permissions for that script. And in this particular case, since we were the ones that created this, okay, we are both the user and then we are a group of Python Ninja. We don't have to put in what's called a sudo. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But in this particular case, all I need to do is put in what's called a change mod, where you're actually changing the permissions. And you can do one of two things. If you wanted to make sure that you have certain values, you can do it as a number. And so each one of these is binary. So if you were to add all of these up and every single one was, executable or usable, then this would be a 7, because this is, 2 to the 2, 2 to the 1, 2 to the 0. Okay, 7. And so I may need to write this down to show you guys what I'm talking about. Or you can actually use letters to say, I want to make everything in this particular one executable. So the easy one to do is just to add an X to your basic script. And you notice if you try and tab over, even before you do that, it'll let you do it, because now it's saying, oh yeah, for that particular file, I want to go ahead and do that. Okay. Now, if you go into the list, you're going to notice that now every single portion has been assigned a executable. Now we said that world writable is not really a good idea. So instead of doing it where we just add a full executable in there, I'm gonna use a number instead, and I want you to see the results, the differences between the two. So if I change the value there, and then I list my contents again, notice the difference between the first one, where we had all executables, and the second one. In this particular case, 7 is associated with assigning the user both read, write, and execute privilege, but then only allowing the group read and then the rest of the world read. So the rest of the world could read it, but they can't make a modification. It's read only. All right, great. So now when we go ahead and do our script, it's going to go ahead and run. Okay. In our particular case, we only had imported of modules, so the script ran and then it didn't have any activities to do, so that it moved on. All right. So anybody have any questions about this in terms of permissions? All right.